Analysis, coming to you today from Cleveland, Ohio. Our session today is on coal mine closures, current issues as the industry rapidly declines. Our moderator is Shannon Fisk, the managing attorney for coal at Earth Justice, and he's based in Philadelphia. Prior to joining Earth Justice in 2012, Shannon was an attorney with both the Natural Resources Defense Council and the Environmental Law and Policy Center in Chicago. And now let me turn this over to Shannon to get us started.
Thank you, Sandy. And hello, everybody. Welcome to today's session of the IEFA virtual conference. To start, I'd like to thank Sandy and the rest of the IEFA team for all their work they put into making this virtual conference happen. As Sandy mentioned, today's session is about coal mine closure. And as the title of the session states, there's little dispute that the coal mining industry in the US is in steep decline. Coal consumption has declined from a peak of about 1.1 billion tons in 2007 to less than 600 million tons in 2019. And coal mining in the US has dropped from a 2008 peak of nearly 1.2 billion tons to approximately 700 million tons. These declines obviously are a huge positive for public health, the climate, and the environment. But at the same time, the closure of coal mines, especially in Appalachia and Wyoming, are leading to the loss of thousands of jobs, declining tax revenues for mining communities, and the abandonment of mining sites without environmental remediation needed to address serious water pollution problems and restore the land. All those problems are made exponentially worse by rapacious coal companies and vulture capitalists who use bankruptcy laws to shed pension, healthcare, and environmental responsibilities while extracting every last penny of wealth from the mines and their workers. We have two great panelists today to talk about these challenges and what we can do about them. First will be Shannon Anderson, who is a staff attorney at the Powder River Basin Resource Council, where she provides strategic, legal, and organizing support to address the impacts of coal mining and power plants on people and places in Wyoming. Shannon currently lives in her hometown of Sheridan, Wyoming. And our second presenter will be Mary Cromer, who's the Deputy Director of the Appalachian Citizens Law Center, where she has worked since 2008. During her time there, she has expanded the center's community-based environmental law work, and she represents individuals on a variety of environmental justice issues related to the legacy costs of coal mining, including landowner rights issues, toxic waste disposal, and safe drinking water. And Mary lives on a farm in Wise County, Virginia. After the presentations from Shannon and Mary, I will moderate a Q&A session with them both. If you have any questions that you would like to be asked of the presenters, you can submit them through the online platform. On the right-hand side of the live feed, there's a chat box with 3 tabs. The first tab, labeled Chat, is in live discussion, where you can share your opinions and reactions to the session with other audience members. The second tab is labeled Questions. This is where you should type in the questions you want the speakers to answer. If someone else has asked a question you like, please click the thumbs up, and that question will be pushed to the top of the list. We will not be using the poll tab in this session. So with that, we will go to the video presentations, and then we'll come back for the Q&A.
Hi, I'm Shannon Anderson with Powder River Basin Resource Council. Thanks to IEFA for hosting the summer conference. I miss you all in person, but I hope you're all staying happy and safe and healthy. And I look forward to seeing you all sometime soon. So I am going to be presenting on the Powder River Basin and particularly the current issues that our industry here in Wyoming is facing as the coal industry declines. So for those of you that haven't been to the Powder River Basin, here's a shot of what the basin looks like without coal mining. There's expansive grasslands and beautiful sagebrush landscapes, wide open vistas. It's a really beautiful part of the country, and and I encourage everyone to come and visit sometime. But the Powder River Basin also has a lot of coal mines. So we have about a dozen of the largest mines in the world shown here on this map. I'm speaking to you this morning from the town of Sheridan, which is, as you can see, on the western edge of the Powder River Basin. And the mines are in the middle part of the basin, close to the city of Gillette. And this is generally what a coal mine looks like. Our mines are incredibly large and very, very big open pits. It's surface mining here in Wyoming, and you can see kind of just the scale of the mining that happens here. Again, very large pits. You can see the industrial equipment in the middle of that pit is just kind of like little dots, and that just shows you the scale of the mining operations here. So mining in Wyoming produces about 40% of the nation's coal. And again, it comes from these very, very large strip mines that roughly a dozen of them throughout the Powder River Basin that produce very large amounts of coal. But like the rest of the country, our coal mines are decreasing in production. So you can see here that coal hit a peak in about 2008, and since then has been steadily declining. We're now producing just under 300 million tons a year, which is still 300 million tons of coal, but is significantly down compared to where it was in 2008. And this information shows you that decline in production also has a steep decline in revenue. These numbers are not mine. They are borrowed from Dr. Rob Godbee at the University of Wyoming, who has done a lot of analysis in crunching the numbers on what this decline in production means for our state. So you can see, declines in revenue, decline in jobs, and really just community impacts all over the board across our state with this decline in production. This shows you that the Powder River Basin and mines across the country, really in order to right size mining with a decrease in demand from the power sector, there will be a number of mines that are going to have to shut down in order to right size that production. And that's happened a number of ways, but one way that we're seeing in the coal industry where mines are kind of coming off the board is through bankruptcies. So bankruptcies are happening across the country in the coal sector, including here in Wyoming. And as the quote shows you, bankruptcies going forward are less likely to be reorganizations and more liquidations, meaning companies are going to completely liquidate, mines are going to shut down, and people will lose jobs, and communities will lose revenue. So we need to really start thinking about what that means for states like Wyoming and our colleagues in Appalachia as well. When a coal mine is shut down, it really has immediate impacts for the miners themselves, for the communities, and potentially for the environment as well. When mines are shut down without adequate planning, there's issues with water treatment, there's issues with stabilization of the site, reclamation concerns. So when the Black Jewel mines were shut down a year ago, we worked with colleagues in Appalachia to really send some red flags to our regulators, both at the state and federal level, asking them to take a look at these mine sites and make sure when they are shut down that offsite impacts and impacts to the environment are minimized to the best way they can be. This is just an example of the Black Jewel bankruptcy in particular. It was very hard for communities, for workers, and for the environment. There's a lot of legacy issues that we're grappling with as the bankruptcy continues. But ultimately, why the bankruptcy happened was because of vulture capitalism. So there was a guy named Jeff Hoops, and he decided to invest in bankrupt coal mines and to potentially suck them dry to get as much profit as he possibly could from them, and then run them into the ground again. So that's basically what he did. And he is still very rich and wealthy himself, And so there's a lot of issues in the bankruptcy about how to potentially collect on his assets, and particularly this resort that he's building in West Virginia, to see if there's a way to really kind of get some of his money that he stole from the company. And then here's the situation that Black Jewel left here in Wyoming. There was a company named Alpha Natural Resources. They went into bankruptcy in 2015. They ended up creating a new company in that bankruptcy called Contura Energy. Contura Energy then tried to sell its coal mines here in Wyoming to Black Jewel. Black Jewel then went into bankruptcy. And then Black Jewel tried to sell its mines back to Contura. And then Contura decided to not go forward with that. And there was a new company that kind of came onto the scene called Eagle Specialty Materials, and they ended up buying the coal mines in the bankruptcy. And then most recently, Eagle Specialty Materials actually merged with the subsidiary here in Wyoming of Contura. So you can see this whole cycle of vulture capitalism, where you have a company that goes bankrupt and then creates a new company and then sells to another company, and then here's another company coming in. But the ultimate scenario that we have here in Wyoming, and actually across the coal sector in the nation, is exemplified by this quote from Josh Macy, that the coal industry is increasingly dominated by underfunded companies that sprang up to acquire liabilities that the larger companies did not want to be responsible for. So you have an ongoing game of shifting liabilities and escaping the problems to the environment, to workers, to communities. So that's really where the coal industry is today. And it's a mess, and we've really got to work collectively to make sure these problems get addressed. So what do we do about it? So one thing we've been working here in Wyoming is to really strengthen up our bonding rules, make sure that reclamation and ultimate cleanup of these mine sites is achieved, regardless of whether the company is around or not anymore. So we worked really hard to improve our coal bonding rules last year, and to really limit a practice that was very problematic in Wyoming called self-bonding, where essentially a company like Peabody, that was very large, said, hey, you know, we're Peabody, we're good for it. We don't actually need to put up any cash collateral or any additional money to guarantee our reclamation obligations. Luckily, Wyoming regulators cracked down on that practice, and we have a new set of bonding rules here in the state. We're looking forward to working with other states and to potentially to push these rules nationwide, like OSM and the Obama administration wanted to do. We've also been working to address what's called collateral bonding, and this is reclamation bonding that's secured by real property collateral. In the case of Contura, it was ranch land here in the state that they had put up as collateral for the state of Wyoming to basically sell if reclamation obligations came due. We worked to make sure that the appraisal of that land was public, and this has led to the deterrence of that practice, and has led ESM and Contura to replace all of their collateral bondings with third-party surety bondings, which are more secure and actually have a third party attached to them. We've also been working with a coalition of great groups to push abandoned mine land fund reauthorization. Unfortunately, the AML fee expires in September 2021. That is next year. So it's really important that we push the bills that are in Congress and make sure the abandoned mine land fund gets reauthorized. And that provides a good pot of money for addressing the legacy issues of the coal industry. We've also been working with a coalition of groups to support the Reclaim Act. This is a bill championed by Representative Cartwright from Pennsylvania, and it would allow coal mines to not only be reclaimed, but to be repurposed for economic development activities in various states. So it's a good way to use the AML fund to not only clean up mine sites, but to ensure a just transition for those communities where mining occurred. So those are the main work that we've been doing: reclamation bonding, supporting the Reclaim Act, AML reauthorization, and really getting dirty in these bankruptcies to make sure that the mines aren't left abandoned and that communities remain protected. So I look forward to answering any questions you may have, and feel free to follow us and like us and pay attention to our information. We put up a lot of information about the coal industry here in the state on our social media and via our website. Thank you.
Good afternoon and welcome. I want to thank IEFA for this opportunity. My name is Mary Cromer. I am Deputy Director of Appalachian Citizens Law Center in Whitesburg, Kentucky. ACLC was formed 20 years ago, and since our beginning, we've represented miners in black lung and whistleblower protection cases, and we've also represented individuals and organizations dealing with the environmental effects of coal mining. Over the years, our focus has evolved to encompass more policy and organizing work advocating for a just transition for the region. Today, I'm going to provide a snapshot of two coal companies' bankruptcies, Cambrian and Blackjewel, and talk about how those bankruptcies are impacting Eastern Kentucky. I'm also going to talk briefly about how the industry's decline comes at a time when the externalized costs of the industry are reaching a crisis point in two areas: water infrastructure and black lung disease. This is a map of Eastern Kentucky with the permit boundaries of the two bankrupt companies highlighted. We believe that these two bankruptcies represent the beginning of the end of the industry in our area. For Blackjewel in particular, this is a culmination of a shell game where coal executives offload liabilities to workers in the environment onto increasingly undercapitalized and riskier operations. I provide this as a broad strokes comparison of the two bankruptcies. You'll see that both were filed last summer and both companies had around 700 employees in Kentucky at the time of filing. As you can see, Blackjewel has a lot more SMACRA permits and a lot more permitted acreage than Cambrian. The bonding amounts for each company are substantial. As these bankruptcies proceed, it seems increasingly likely that many of these bonds will be called. That leads to a growing concern for the solvency of the bonding companies. How these two companies got their permits and the liabilities that came with them is an important part of these bankruptcy stories. For Cambrian, it got most of its permits from the purchase of one company, TECO, in 2015. With that purchase, it also got 294,000 acres of land in eastern Kentucky and 290 million tons of proven and probable coal reserves. At the same time, it also took on $40 million in employee liabilities and about $90 million in performance bonds. Cambrian paid nothing for the deal up front. Instead, the deal called for $60 million in payments should coal reach certain benchmark prices. None of those payments were ever made. Blackjewel, on the other hand, got most of its permits in previous coal bankruptcies. It got 38% of its permits in 2014, 28% in 2015, and 5% in 2016. These two bankruptcies have been particularly chaotic and unjust for the miners working for these two companies. When Blackjewel sought bankruptcy protection in July 2019, it had just issued bad payroll checks that were clawed back from the miners' accounts after they were deposited. Miners in Harlan County, Kentucky, blocked a coal train and demanded their pay. The Department of Labor ultimately determined that the coal was hot goods and prevented its sale until the miners were paid. 4 months later, miners were back on the tracks when American Resource Corporation, which had bought a number of Cambrian's mines, failed to pay wages just before Christmas. This protest was also successful in that the miners were eventually paid, but those successes are cold comfort. Currently, only 134 miners work at Cambrian sites and 215 work at Blackjewel sites. That means over 1,000 jobs have been lost in eastern Kentucky from these two bankruptcies alone. Another common feature of these bankruptcies is that in the bankruptcy process, most mining permits have sold, but for known and unknown reasons, buyers are not pursuing permit transfers. That leaves all environmental compliance obligations and all reclamation liabilities with the bankrupt estates. For Cambrian, all of the permits sold in September of 2019 to 2 companies, but to date, no permits have transferred. That is because, as the Kentucky Cabinet reported to the bankruptcy court in May, both of the buyers of these permits are permit blocked because of outstanding unabated violations at other mine sites. What's more, both of those permit blocks appear to have been in place in September when the sales were consummated, but no one told the bankruptcy court of this important fact. For Black Jewel, 71% of the permits have reportedly sold, but only 5 of the 213 permits in Kentucky have transferred. Eagle Specialty Materials agreed to buy 80 of the Kentucky permits only as a condition of getting bonding for the 2 Wyoming permits that it bought from Black Jewel. Eagle Specialty Materials has said that it will not mine on any of the Kentucky permits. Black Jewel has told the bankruptcy court that it intends to abandon any permits that are not sold in the bankruptcy process. As these bankruptcies move into their second years, the bankrupt companies are racking up huge numbers of environmental violations. For Black Jewel, that trend is most pronounced for the numerous permits where there's been no move to transfer the permit to a new buyer. For those permits, the number of violations of SNCRA's physical performance standards more than doubled from fourth quarter 2019 to first quarter 2020. To get a sense of what some of these environmental violations look like, I'm going to focus in on one 500-acre Cambrian permit. This is an aerial of that permit. I want you to notice that there are a number of houses in very close proximity just below this mine site. That is a common feature of these large-scale surface mines in central Appalachia. They are often located near residences and near communities. Since the bankruptcy, Cambrian has been cited multiple times on this permit for violations, including failure to contemporaneously reclaim, failure to revegetate, improper spoil disposal, and failure to backfill and grade. This picture was included on an inspection report as evidence of the company's violation of the steep slope mining performance standards. In 2015, citing the soft demand for coal, Cambrian applied for what's called a coal market deferment of its reclamation obligations on this mine site. The deferment was granted. By statute, the deferment could last for only 30 months, which would have meant that the company had to start reclaiming in early 2018 at the latest. But as this picture from May of 2020 demonstrates, that reclamation was clearly never done. The bankruptcies aren't the whole story. They're occurring at a time when the region is already suffering from the decline in coal production. In Letcher County, where ACLC's office is located, revenue declined 40% from 2013 to 2019. That decline is attributable to the decreases in unmined coal and coal severance taxes, as well as to the overall decline in the county's tax base caused by the decrease in coal jobs. We're seeing the impact of the declining revenues and loss of basic services throughout the region. The region's water infrastructure has reached a crisis point. For decades, as coal production increased, groundwater systems were contaminated or destroyed. In the 1980s and 1990s, as mountaintop removal consumed thousands of acres and buried miles of streams in eastern Kentucky, county governments scrambled to build water lines up and over mountains to reach residents whose wells had been polluted or sunk. Those water systems are now failing throughout the region. In particular, brittle distribution lines lead to breaks and infiltration of contaminated water into the water system. Boil water advisories are common. Martin County's water district is generally considered to be the worst in the state. The struggling district loses over 70% of the water it produces because of breaks in the lines. The district is nearly $1 million in debt. Residents of Martin County, about 40% of whom live below the poverty level, already pay some of the highest water rates in the state. Last year, in response to the district's petition for a 50% rate increase, ACLC published this report. We were able to convince the Kentucky Public Service Commission not to grant the rate increase. Instead, the district was required to fund an outside management company using its depreciation expense. We are hopeful that the improvements and efficiencies brought by the outside management company will stabilize the system such that a rate increase will not be necessary. Now I want to talk about black lung. As coal is declining, we are seeing an increase in the prevalence and the severity of black lung disease in our area. These images compare a healthy lung to that of a miner with black lung. Recent NIOSH studies have shown that 20% of veteran miners in our area have black lung disease. That is a sharp increase in the percentage of miners suffering with this deadly, incurable, but totally preventable occupational disease. But what's worse, 5% of the miners in our area now suffer from complicated black lung disease. The percentage of miners with this form of black lung has nearly doubled in our region since 1970, when MSHA first began regulating dust exposure in mines. Over the past decade, ACLC has seen our caseload of complicated black lung cases increase by 20-fold. Despite the increase in prevalence and severity of black lung, in 2018, Congress allowed the trust fund that pays most miners black lung benefits to be cut in half. That decision spurred local black lung associations into action. Last summer, ACLC and a number of other organizations in Central Appalachia organized a group of 150 miners to spend 2 days at the Capitol lobbying to restore funding for the Black Lung Trust Fund. The effort was successful in that Congress extended full funding for the program for a year. We continue to work with the Black Lung associations to pressure Congress to reinstate full funding for the trust fund. All of our work at ACLC is focused on the fight for just transition in our region. We are working closely with organizations of frontline coal communities throughout the country to propose policies to ensure transition planning that includes investment in the types of jobs we need to address the legacy problems that coal is leaving behind. Not only is addressing legacy problems critical for building a new economy, but land and water cleanup and infrastructure rebuilding can also create good jobs in the interim, during the transition, as any kind of economic redevelopment strategy for the region will take many years to fully develop. Thank you for your time and for your attention, and I really look forward to our discussion.
Great. Well, welcome back, everyone. Hope you enjoyed the presentations, and I'd like to welcome Shannon Anderson and Mary Cromer, who are joining us, and thank you both for your excellent presentations. We will now proceed with the question and answer portion of today's session. And as a reminder for the audience, please enter any questions that you would like me to ask in the questions tab on the right side of the screen. I'll try to get as many of them asked as possible. Start off with a question for Shannon Anderson. Could you talk a little bit about what other strategies, I know you talked about the Reclaim Act a bit in your presentation, but if you could talk about other strategies for providing a just transition for coal mining workers and communities in Wyoming.
Yeah, thanks, Shannon, and thanks, AIFA, for hosting this panel today. So Wyoming is roughly dependent on fossil fuels by 2/3 of our economy, our budget, just how we make our money here in the state. So it's a challenge, not only on the job side, but also the revenue side, to really think about what it means for a just transition, not only for the communities where coal mines are located, but also our state as a whole. So we've been working really hard as an organization to focus on diversification, thinking about diverse revenue streams, how to help us become less dependent on fossil fuels, especially coal and oil and gas. We've been looking at things like securitization, which I know a lot of groups have been as well, to think about our power plant communities and how we can reinvest in economic growth and opportunities in those communities. And then Wyoming is really lucky to have a multi-billion-dollar permanent fund as well. We have a sovereign wealth fund in the state, and we've, as an organization, have always supported that as our future and the way that future generations can really have a share of our mineral wealth that is mined from the ground today. So we've been, as an organization, really protective of that sovereign fund, and most recently have opposed the state of Wyoming's proposed purchase of Occidental lands and minerals in southern Wyoming from that permanent fund.
Great, thank you. Mary, on this theme of just transition, you spoke about that work in your presentation, and especially around kind of water infrastructure impacts, and obviously the black lung disease that is affecting so many coal miners. I'm curious to what extent have you been able to work with or engage with labor movements on just transition, and do you have any thoughts about how the environmental labor movements can partner better on such work?
Sure. Thank you, Shannon. And thank you, Sandy and Aifa. Yeah, I think in the context of just transition isn't a labor issue and it's not an environmental issue. It's a justice issue that spans lots of different arenas. So I think there's a lot of space for collaboration, a lot more space than maybe has existed between environmental groups and labor groups than in the past. And in particular, in the area of black lung, there's a lot of overlap between the Black Lung Associations that we work directly with and the UMWA. And our work with the Reclaim Coalition has been able to sort of build on that relationship and extend those relationships. And back in March, the coalition sent a letter to House leadership asking them to support the AML reauthorization, to support Black lung funding, and to support the Reclaim Act. And that letter was signed onto by a number of labor groups. And then sort of backing out and talking more about the just transition policy work at the state and regional and national levels, those conversations, well, for one thing, Blue Green Alliance is very involved in a lot of those conversations. And we are working really hard to make sure that those conversations are intersecting with conversations that labor groups are having around just transition as well. And I'm not suggesting it's perfect or that we've figured it out in by any means, but I think what is clear is that in all of these conversations, we have to make sure that we're laying the groundwork for clear communications between groups. Especially when it comes to developing platforms around solutions, there needs to be a process for negotiations among the stakeholders before any one group comes out with a platform or a policy position around a solution. I think we need to make sure that we're considering considering different stakeholders and considering labor's needs and interests, and considering the environmental community's needs and interests as we're developing those platforms.
Great, thanks. That's great to hear that some of that work is going on, and that there's thinking around how to do even more of that. Turn to a few questions from the audience. First one is from Kate Aronoff at the New Republic, and maybe Shannon, if you want to take this one first. How unique are the sorts of bankruptcy practices that you both talked about in your presentations? How unique are those to coal, and are there similar dynamics in the oil and gas bankruptcies?
Yeah, so bankruptcy is a very flawed system. It basically allows a company that should not exist to continue to exist. That's the whole purpose of Chapter 11 reorganization. And so for both coal and oil and gas bankruptcies, we've seen a host of problems. A lot of companies pay what are called executive bonuses. They're retention bonuses designed to have the leadership team kind of weather the storm through the bankruptcy proceeding. But these are the same folks that drove the company into bankruptcy, and they're effectively being rewarded for it. So we saw that a lot in the coal bankruptcies, Peabody and Arch. We've seen it in oil and gas recently with some of the big oil and gas bankruptcies. So the executive bonuses stuff is a real problem. And with that, it sort of shifts the money away from who should really get paid, which are communities, workers, all of that as well. So we've seen other things where, healthcare for retired miners and oil and gas employees has been cut. And then, just overall debt relief is just staggering in some of these bankruptcies. Peabody, for instance, got rid of $5 billion in debt in the bankruptcy. $5 billion. I barely just did the public interest program for my loan repayment of, 40,000. So, it's really amazing just the amount of money that these companies are able to just walk away from through these bankruptcies. The oil and gas industry in particular has just wiped off a ton of debt from its books through bankruptcies.
Yeah, it seems like quite a broken system, and be interested, I guess, in talking a little bit about strategies or efforts to kind of change the system. And I think on that line, first a question from the audience from Sergio Nabel from the Sandler Foundation. Are miners organized and vocal in protesting bankruptcies where executives are trying to loot company assets and leave their workers high and dry? And is there any legal recourse currently in the system? Mary, you have thoughts on that?
I'll jump in on that one and talk a little bit about the Black Jewel situation, because the miners did organize and protest that bankruptcy. It was clear from the beginning that the former executive controller of Black Jewel, Jeff Hoops, had underfunded, undercapitalized Black Jewel, run it into the ground, and was still yet managing to siphon off lots of money into his other ventures, including building a extremely gaudy and expensive palace for his wife in West Virginia. And that's the kind of stuff that, really gets people upset. That and the fact that, as I talk about in the presentation, what was apparently the final straw for Black Jewel is they couldn't meet payroll, despite the fact that they issued the checks. They knew they were bad when they were issued. And so in that instance, the miners really did organize using social media, and were able to, and had the foresight to block the tracks before they were able to get the coal out of the processing facility, and sat there for 2 months blocking the tracks. And in that instance, they did have legal recourse because they were basically effectuating the hot goods law. Department of Labor determined that the coal, because the workers had not been paid for the coal that was mined, that the coal could not be sold, that it was hot goods. And so they were incredibly effective in basically in that particular style of protest, and were able to ultimately get a settlement that got them most of, as I understand it, most of the back pay that they were owed. There's still other issues regarding what the miners are owed that have not, I think, completely been resolved. But I think that was an instance where there was organizing. And then later on, as I mentioned in the presentation, 4 months later, there was a similar situation where American Resource Corporation, again, did not meet payroll right around Christmas, and the miners once again blocked the tracks and were able to negotiate with the company and get their pay. So in those circumstances, yes, but these are really, really extreme circumstances where it seems quite obvious just from the news reports around the bankruptcy that particular executives have been looting the company, and the miners are directly on the hook and not getting paid. And so you can't imagine. It's understandable that organizing would just occur organically in that type of situation. I want to say, in Central Appalachia, especially in Kentucky, we don't have formal union mines and haven't for 25 to 30 years. So there is no formal organizing that is going on, as far as at the union level.
Yeah, Shannon, if I could, I was just going to weigh in that I think it would surprise people that as strong as United Mine Workers are, and politically, they're actually very weak in terms of coal mine membership. There's very few labor oriented coal mines anymore. But the UMWA mines that still exist, there's been a marked difference in these bankruptcies when UMWA can get to the table, file motions, and really be there for the workers. I saw that, just the difference between the Westmoreland bankruptcy, for instance, that had a lot of union miners versus the Black Jewel bankruptcy that did not have union miners. So when labor is at the table, there is a difference, but it's few and far between now with coal mines.
Sad development. Do you have any, like what percent of mines are still labor at this point?
I don't. Again, there's one in Wyoming, so it's
You're none.
Well, and I guess a question that maybe gets to, are there other players who can help ensure that some of these issues are addressed? Allison Kirsch from Rainforest Action Network asks, what role do or should the bankruptcy creditors and regulators play in ensuring that mines aren't left abandoned, workers are taken care of, etc.? Shannon, you want to start with that one there? Either way.
Yeah, I think there's a really good role that external forces can play for accountability of the coal industry. And one of those external forces that we're interested a lot is the surety industry, because they're big players in these bankruptcies. They provide bonding for reclamation work. So they can be a big player in some of these decisions, and hopefully we'll kind of right the ship a little bit to make sure that the mines that should no longer operate really stop operating and force the cleanup obligations that they have. And then I think, shareholders and all of that are also helpful. I would just say that, again, a lot of coal mines are not publicly traded. They're privately held, they're LLCs. There just isn't often the same accountability tools that you have for the larger publicly traded companies.
And if I could add just a little bit, one thing that I agree with everything Shannon said, and with Shannon with what you said earlier about bankruptcy being such a flawed process. To me, one of the additional fundamental problems with bankruptcy is the focus on economic stability and expediency just means that things go through so quickly, and there's very little appetite, it seems, to really scrutinize what is being proposed and what is being done and how the company got into bankruptcy in the first place. And I think that there is a role that could be played more strongly by state and federal regulators in the bankruptcy process by just asking the court to look into these deals, raising questions about, whether, I think I mentioned in the presentation, in both the Black Jewel and Cambrian context, a lot of the companies that were buying these permits can't even get permits. And that's a place where I think that the state regulators, OSM, should be in the bankruptcy court sort of scrutinizing these deals and raising questions, and that just doesn't seem to be happening enough. Another place I think that regulators could raise questions sort of on behalf of the communities is looking more into how companies get into bankruptcy in the first place and whether there are, other debtors that should be brought in. It just seems like a lot of things are taken at face value just in the interest of getting it done and getting it done quickly. And I think that, until the workers and the communities that are affected actually have a seat at the table as parties in a bankruptcy, we're really relying on the state regulators to protect us. And, they're not always doing that.
Yeah, I mean, we just saw a motion in the Black Jewel bankruptcy from one company who wants to buy some old Black Jewel mines for $5,000. So you too can buy a coal mine for $5,000. And half of it will go to the regulators because there's outstanding environmental violations that have to be paid off. So it's it's a really interesting process. And of course, the bankruptcy judge has this huge incentive, as Mary said, to just approve it and let it go and take it out of what's called the debtor's estate, and help Black Jewel get out of bankruptcy. So the incentives are really perverse in some of these bankruptcy proceedings.
Are there any states that are doing, state regulators that kind of are doing a better job at representing, engaging in these proceedings than others? Or?
Yeah, Wyoming is not doing a good job, so there's that. And Mary can speak to this, but Kentucky, I think, has been the best example, but not great, but still probably the best.
Yeah.
And one of the things I just wanted to bring up as to Kentucky, it's just sort of an interesting tidbit, but I think it illustrates how important the state's role could be. It has come out in the past week in the Cambrian bankruptcy that not only that the company American Resource Corporation, which is permit blocked from way back, has a massive list of outstanding violations that on other sites that they would have to remedy before they could ever get a permit. That Kentucky knew that this was known at the time American Resource, that the sale was approved to American Resource, and that Kentucky cabinet under previous administration represented to the court that they would work with American Resource and try to figure it out and try to make sure that those permits went through. This new administration, the cabinet has been telling the court that no, this company is permit blocked. And so it can vary from state to state and from administration to administration, but they have a powerful role that they can play on behalf of communities when they're willing to.
Yeah, and I think that the role is getting a little easier for some of these mines as well when they're already idle, they don't have the employment, they're not producing the revenue. So really all there is the environmental legacy and the violations to deal with. And so that is a different situation. And often what we see, of course, is regulators that coddle the industry, have this perverse incentive because of the revenue and the jobs. And so when that's taken off the table, I think that also frees up regulators to be a little bit more vocal and involved.
Right. Yeah. Very interesting to hear about the different states and how well or not they're doing on engaging here. Shifting the topic a little bit, we have two questions from the audience about Black lung issues that I think kind of go together well. One is from Alan Yu, who asks, surprised that the rate of Black lung has been increasing in recent years. Can you explain why? And then the second from Robin Blakeman at Ohio Valley Environmental Coalition asks if you have any statistics on how many non-miners in communities adjacent to large-scale strip mines or NPR are now experiencing Black lung issues. And maybe I'll kick that to Mary first.
Sure. So starting out with why it's increasing and is much more severe. We're seeing a lot more severe Black lung. It seems to be, and I think it's a developing consensus among the studies that the issue is really that more rock is being mined. So it's a lot more of a silicosis type disease that we're seeing. And that just has happened as the large coal seams have been mined out and companies are mining smaller and smaller seams and just getting a lot more rock as they're mining. Also, as the industry has contracted, we've seen an increase in sort of smaller operations that are running mines 24 hours a day with really long shifts. So I've talked to miners at Black Jewel who were underground 16, 17 hours at a time, day upon day, day after day. And when you're having that kind of exposure, not to mention the probably lax use of curtains and fans and proper ventilation, it's just going to get a lot worse. So a lot of it just really has to do with the structural changes that are occurring in the way coal is being mined as the industry is declining. And that's why we believe that Black lung severity is increasing. I don't know about Black lung among community members. I don't know any studies on that. I think it would be very interesting to see what that looks like. I know a lot of the the health impacts around mountaintop removal are lung impacts based on inhalation. So it would be interesting to see a lot more studies on that, but I don't know of any that are out there now.
Great, thank you. Question from Leslie Bostrom for Shannon. Which mines or companies in the PRB do you expect to close or go bankrupt next?
Yeah, so my crystal ball is a little fuzzy on this one. I know Leslie, and you do as well, the answer of what it should be. The question is what will be. And again, it's partly bankruptcy law, it's partly regulators trying to keep these mines going for employment and job purposes. It's sort of interesting. There's a group of mines that Peabody and Arch have, and they've been trying to do this joint venture. It's interesting because the Trump administration, FTC, has actually opposed the joint venture. So now the companies are in court and Wyoming's backing them to try and allow this joint venture to go forward, because they have the two largest coal mines in the country, but they also have a couple of other smaller mines that in reality should no longer be in existence. Coal Creek in particular is one of those mines. And there's, again, a couple of smaller mines as well. We do have some mine mouth mines in Wyoming, but most of our mines go to power plants out of state. And so really what you can do, and Seth at IEFA has done this, is you look at the power plants and which ones are retiring and trace it back to the mine. And that gives you some indication of what's going to happen at the mine. And there's some pretty stark warning signs out there.
Great. Thank you, Shannon. Another question that been asked kind of in similar ways by two people. One is from Tanya Stasio at the Applied Economics Clinic, and then also been asked by Rahul Chaudhary from India, from the Legal Initiative for Forest and Environment. If we have good examples of programs where workers have been provided alternative jobs, trained for alternative jobs, and if to the extent we don't have good examples, what are kind of the hurdles to that happening? I don't know, Mary, do you want to start on that one here?
Yeah, there are definitely examples in Appalachia of retraining programs, and some have been more successful than others. The primary hurdle is the lack of jobs. So you're retraining people for jobs that don't exist where they're being trained, with the idea, I guess, that they're all going to move to some other part of the country where those jobs exist. And that just really hasn't gone very well. And that's why job retraining is, in the just transition context, is just one small piece of an overall picture, because of that understanding that you can't, when you have an area that is so dominated by one industry, and then that industry bottoms out, there's a lot more rebuilding to do. It's not just about retraining a worker to do another job, if that job isn't there.
Yeah, and I would just add that I think the coal industry could, of course, be a much better partner in some of this. And we know on the utility side at coal plants, some utilities are really good partners for communities in thinking about zero job loss and what that really means for their workers. But I've yet to hear of a coal mine company that takes that responsibility seriously. These are companies that exist solely to get coal out of the ground, and their workers are sort of liabilities and these externalities that they don't really like to think about. and hence the union busting and everything else that's gone on. So I would really like to see companies like Peabody step it up and really think about what a just transition means for their miners and their communities. And that would be lovely to see.
Great. So we're getting close to the end here. So we're going to take one last question. And this one, and I hope I don't get the name too wrong, is from Kel Shunli from Leave It in the Ground. And the question is, the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative has rules on disclosing beneficial ownership, i.e. which individuals profit financially. Would this approach be useful for limiting or even reversing the ability of investors to kind of walk away from these mines after they've pulled all the money out of them and shed their stranded liabilities? And I don't know, Mary, do you want to start with that one? Or?
Sure. I think I'm not sure what EITI's beneficial ownership rules look like, but this does mesh with one of the fundamental problems that I see with bankruptcy, is that unwillingness to sort of look under the hood and see what's really going on. And I think if there were more scrutiny of who has benefited from these companies prior to filing bankruptcy, that we could potentially get the money back from those beneficiaries, I guess, that could go to workers and that could go to cleanup. I think, in the Cambrian situation, I'll just say one of the very recent filings in that bankruptcy was a joint disclosure statement in support of the liquidation plan. And in that disclosure statement, it was revealed that the prior owner of Cambrian had actually offloaded $50 million of debt from his other coal companies onto Cambrian, ballooned that debt up to $100 million and taken Cambrian into bankruptcy. But so he had been able to basically wash debt from other companies through the Cambrian bankruptcy. And, we'll see, if the plan gets approved, but we're a year into the bankruptcy and that has just now been disclosed. So I think there is a lot that could be done as far as slowing the process down and doing a lot more scrutiny on where the money has gone and who has benefited.
Yeah. Great. Well, I think that gets us to the end of our time. I want to thank both of our presenters, Shannon Anderson and Mary Kromer, so much for the presentations and also for all the work you're doing on ensuring that just transitions and cleanups occur at these coal mines. So thank you all.
Great. And thank you so much, Shannon, Mary, and Shannon, for sharing your depth of experience on this issue with us. And we appreciate all you participating here today. You can continue to chat, and you can also use the networking features of this website to connect with other folks. Throughout this conference, we're featuring the extraordinary work of many organizations who are accelerating the transition in energy fields in their own communities. And the very end of the presentation, in a couple of minutes, we're going to show you a video on the remarkable work of Cambio Puerto Rico, led by Ingrid Villa-Biaggi. And we hope you'll stay and watch it. It just takes about 8 minutes. And we also hope that you'll join us back here tomorrow, where we have our next session at the same time. And this one is on headwinds for LNG, cooling markets, warming planet. Thanks again for joining us, and goodbye.
I'm Ingrid Villa. I'm an environmental engineer, so that's how I got into environmental issues. I actually studied environmental engineering. I have a bachelor's degree in environmental engineering from Cornell University and a master's in environmental engineering with specialty on water studies from Stanford University. I've served in government a couple of times. The most recent one, I served as Chief of Staff for the Commonwealth in 2013 and 2014.
I had the pleasure of meeting Ingrid a number of years ago when she served as Chief of Staff in the Governor's Office in Puerto Rico. while I was serving as the regional administrator for the Environmental Protection Agency. Ingrid is one of the single most effective professionals I've ever had the privilege of working with. I worked very closely with her on trying to get support and resources to an economically struggling but absolutely beautiful community called Caño Martin Peña, where there was an effort to get people better housing and to dredge an old canal so that it could be ecologically restored and be a resource for the community. We didn't really call it climate change resiliency at the time, but that's exactly what it was. I also worked with Ingrid on trying to convince the U.S. military to clean up the Vieques firing range. For over 60 years, the beautiful tropical island of Vieques was used for military operations and practice ranges. The Department of Defense left behind a legacy of unexploded ordnance. It was a federal Superfund site that EPA was responsible to clean up. Having a partner in the governor's office to try to pick up the pace on that cleanup was really helpful.
Right after I left government, I founded a non-for-profit organization in Puerto Rico called Cambio to support communities and promote sustainable and responsible actions for Puerto Rico. We started Cambio in 2015. Our first project was supporting communities who were fighting against a waste incinerator that was being proposed for Arecibo, Puerto Rico. Communities were opposing this project, yet government was not paying attention to their claims. So we came in and started supporting communities, working together with them.
They wanted to build the incinerator of trash in Arecibo. And it was a struggle that it took us at least about almost 10 years. Ingrid has been a big help to us with all these other people, experts, scientists, doctors, and academic people, religious people. I think we did a real good job educating the population to understand why we were against this incinerator, because, it contaminated, and the health issues, the environmental issues. So we're very happy that we have prevailed.
After Hurricane Maria, the island was left entirely without power. A lot of sectors didn't get power back for up to a year. So we started focusing on energy and sustainable energy alternatives. Unfortunately, in 2018, right after the hurricane, the governor announced that he was going to transform the electric grid, but he was going to do so through privatization and through methods that would continue to pursue fossil fuel investments on the island. And that's how we came up with Queremos Sol, which is the shirt I'm wearing today.
Queremos Sol, which is We Want Sun in English. It's a very diverse group with very many people from different organizations. We have the Electric Union from Puerto Rico as part of Queremos Sol. We have professors from the universities. We want to transform our electric system to use renewables, okay? We live in Puerto Rico. We live in the tropics. We've got sun all year.
We're proposing a sustainable transition to 100% renewable energy using rooftop solar and battery storage, and also promoting a collective purchase alternative that will make it more feasible for communities to be able to acquire solar PV systems. The proposal would put more power to the people. People would have ownership of the system. They would have control of consumption. So the consumer transitions to being someone who is active in the system, in the grid, in participating in decisions that are being made, instead of just being a passive customer. The damage and the shock that Hurricane Maria represented to the people of Puerto Rico suddenly opened the door for people to be receptive to alternatives, for people to start to think about what is the condition of our energy infrastructure and what is the most sensible solution to reduce vulnerability.
We need to invest the infrastructure money on rooftops solar, renewables. We keep insisting on that, and we keep insisting that why it's important that no more fossil fuels in Puerto Rico, no more. And so people now are getting more interested in finding out. I want to know more about this Queremos Sol group.
In terms of the coming year, I'm quite excited about developing this model for collective solar purchase on the island to see if we can actually develop something that will make it affordable for people to be able to acquire these systems. At the same time, I'm quite excited about a modeling work that we're doing actually along with AIFA that will detail what type of investments in infrastructures need to happen in order to get to 100% renewable using rooftop solar. And that is going to be a really powerful tool, because when we are able to demonstrate with modeling that this is something attainable, that this is something that can be done, I think it'll be really difficult for the Power Authority executives and those in charge in government to tell us that this is something that cannot be done, or something that is too costly, or something that could be considered maybe in the future, but not now. So when we finish this modeling work, I think we're going to be in an even better position to pursue our objectives in Queremos Sol.
It's a no-brainer, and Puerto Rico will only transition to a clean energy future if the leadership comes from the residents of Puerto Rico, but the residents also need some technical expertise and some strategic support, and that's where Ingrid comes in. No one's better at this in Puerto Rico than Ingrid. I would argue no one's better than this in the country.
Ingrid Vila is, one of the most extraordinary people I have ever met. I'm very proud of her. With her knowledge and her determination, to do what's right and to help so many people, I think that we can do this now.